Hello, listeners. Welcome to Itihasa, the India History Podcast. And we are back again with Abhijit on the show. And this is our third video episode. And today we'll be picking up from where we left last time on the origins and on the foundation of Vijayanagara. And also, we spoke about the Khiljis and Tughlaqs briefly. Welcome back, Abhijit. Nice to have you.
Thank you, and
So,
it's once again it's a pleasure to be here.
okay. So the Origins episode has been getting some great feedback from the listeners on YouTube and also on Spotify and probably also on the Apple Podcasts. So now let's see what we can flush out in this episode. But yeah, so I'll give the floor to you. So where do you want to start?
I think let's start with the foundation itself. Let's discuss about the political history of the time before the foundation
Right.
and what led to the foundation. So I would want you to just highlight to the listeners what was the political environment of the greater India at this time. So I think in the previous episode we did discuss about Malik Kafur's invasion a little bit, but I think it would make sense for us to go deeper into what was actually happening in the grander India at this time.
Yeah. I think in the last episode we have spoken about Khilji um, and how basically his blitzkrieg tactics had made a good foray into the southern India, and how he was able to weaken Kakatiyas, Yadavas, and also to an extent using his trusted lieutenant. Malik Kafur was also able to breach the defenses of Hoysalas, right? And I think today we can start at the point where the Khiljis, at the end of the last phase of Khiljis, because that's when you see the rise of Tughlaqs. So the Khilji dynasty, as such, Alauddin Khilji, um, in his last years, he kind of becomes. It's a very contrasting aspect. His later life, during his last years, he he basically becomes very paranoid, and he does not trust anyone around him, and he also has a lot of health issues and all of it. So due to all of these reasons, what happens is his influence in the court itself starts waning, and you have these powers slowly rising up, the rival factions, especially those who want to counter the growing influence of Malik Kafur, because his campaigns into the south and all the war booty and the treasures that he was bringing in from south had endeared him very much to the Sultan Khilji, Alauddin Khilji. And as a result, obviously, his own stature in the court was growing, and Malik Kafur was a pretty powerful individual in Khilji's court.
Yeah,
At the same time, yes, please go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. So I just wanted to, I think, probably add to the listeners to make them understand the power dynamics of the court of Alauddin Khilji at this time. And his court isn't unique. A lot of the Islamic sultanates who inquired this gulams or the Mamluks system. So what used to happen is they had this system of Mamluks who were the slave soldiers. They were deliberately created as a counter to their regular military. So which means that they had their so the Mamluks were not just soldiers; they were also administrators. So the sultans had a system. There was a dual system in which one portion was your regular feudatories and feudal vassal lords and everything, and the second was this Mamluk through what do you call military and administrative officials, and they were meant to be in kind of in check, one keeping in check of other because the king couldn't trust either of them. So when Alauddin, as you were mentioning about Alauddin Khilji's last years and how he was trying to relying a little bit more on his Mamluk soldiers and his administrators, that kind of created a suspicion in his regular nobles. the power, either the Turkic or the Afghan nobles. So mostly Afghans, they were lesser Turkic probably, but then there were Turkic nobles as well in Alauddin Khilji's court. So yeah, I would
Right,
let you
right.
continue.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. So yes, in addition to that, uh, there was a large Mongol faction too
Yep.
in Alauddin Khilji's court. And most of the time, Alauddin Khilji, while he treated them with some respect, at least through lip service, but in reality, they weren't given any juicy posts in or positions in Alauddin Khilji's court. And this had led to a lot of resentment among Mongols, among the Mongol faction too, in his court. So what happened was, I think one of the major downfalls of his, uh, or at least big symptom of his own mental downfall, you could see in how he responded to um, few Mongol conspirators among this faction who were trying to create a rebellion and overthrow him. Though this conspiracy is caught in tracks before it can get executed, Alauddin Khilji, what he does is he basically orders a complete massacre of the entire Mongol um, subjects of his, most of them. Because in the earlier years of his rule, Khilji, as cruel as he was in during a war, or how he basically treated the non-Muslim prisoners and all of it, but from a policy standpoint, I know we discussed last time some aspect of how he basically had a different kind of policy of just doing blitzkrieg attacks and just making sure as long as the tribute comes, he's happy with it, right? But in his court, Alauddin Khilji made sure that the ulemas and the Maulanas and the completely religious aspect of his administration was kept separate from. Basically, there was separation of what do you say, church and state. He was very particular about that during the initial years of his rule, and for majority of his rule. But during the end, as his influence waned, and he also had an health condition of edema, where his body, different parts of his body used to get swollen with liquid. And he had, so all of these basically caused it used to give him bouts of fever. And of course, a high fever, we know that it can create all sorts of hallucinations and all, in depending upon the people. And we don't know what anyway, but so all of these basically led to his hold on even the ulemas and all of them to weaken. And so that is where you see Malik Kafur trying to do a power grab. And this is, he goes for the power grab even as Alauddin Khilji is completely kind of a vegetable. And he goes for this power grab and he almost kind of succeeds. And I think the rival factions to basically have him. So basically, he tries to assassinate the rival factions, but then it kind of backfires. And what happens is they end up bribing the very people who Malik Kafur sends. And he basically he's ended up getting assassinated. So there is a lot of palace intrigue and the court intrigue that goes through, where you come to a point where Kafur himself is bumped off.
Yeah.
No later than Khilji dies. So even Kafur's own influence and foothold in the court was very much short-lived. And this is where we see the rise of Tughlaqs. And even that and while all of this was happening, you see as Khilji's dynasty basically sort of ends, Khilji dies, you see the southern kingdoms earlier, which were offering tributes, they kind of now see this opportunity to raise again the banner of rebellion. And you have the Tughlaqs who have to now come down and reassert once again. Right, you have these characters like Mubarak Shah and Khusro, right, who are basically sent again on the campaigns to put, suppress them. And this is where I think even the last nail in the coffin of Yadavas too is also put in. Kakatiyas are of course completely stamped out, and so it comes to a point where they make much more aggressive inroads into the Hoysala Pandya territory, and now they're going for the jugular. They want to now completely Tughlaqs stamp out any resistance till the tip of South India. And so that was the kind of political situation back then. So the only probably strong figures at that time was Veera Ballala. Pandyas probably were, but I wouldn't count them as a serious threat to Tughlaqs because of the constant infighting within Pandyas themselves. The Kulashekara and his brother and all of them, the twins. I think that with both the brothers, they end up in constant struggle, right? And so the one last man probably who was really standing there was Veera Ballala. So that was the political situation by the time Tughlaqs kind of arrived, and they started making inroads.
That's right. And also, compared to Alauddin Khilji, Muhammad bin Tughlaq wanted to directly control many of these regions. He
Right.
wanted a greater control, so which was probably one of the reasons why he shifted his capital from Delhi to Daulatabad, or which was Devagiri, the old Yadava capital. So he shifted from Delhi to Daulatabad. Of course, he did not truly figure out how to do it, so that is why he reshifted. But then that shifting itself ensured that a lot of his courtiers, they moved down and settled in around Devagiri or Daulatabad, as it was called.
Right.
And that is where, from there, you can see this churning happening. And then over a period of time, the Bahmani Sultanate starts, because Bahmani Sultanates were some of the local governors who
Yes.
declared their independence once the Tughlaqs weakened.
Right.
The same thing happens even with Madurai Sultanate, which
So
is
just to kind of add to it there, the Bahmani thing. So you had the main reason for Bahmanis too kind of raising the banner of revolt against Tughlaqs was also mainly because of the entire discrimination against the Deccani faction.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
If
I
you
think
could touch on that, that would be great
yeah,
too.
I think a lot of people don't realize how dynamic the situation in India was, even with respect to the Islamic population of India. So what used to happen is there was a huge churn of new arrivals into India. So a lot of them were either soldiers, or many of them were probably learned men or something. So these foreign Muslims used to come in, settle down in India, and these guys were given bigger posts, greater posts. So that was this. So that was whole Afaki and Deccani kind of thing that
Right.
starts in. Afaki means foreigner basically, and Deccani is basically supposedly local. This is with respect to the Bahmani Sultanate.
Yes.
So Bahmani Sultanate till its end, and even afterwards with the rest of the Shahi Sultanates, there was this constant influx of foreign foreigners coming into the country. I mean, when I mean foreigners, I actually mean foreigners. I mean, I'm not saying that in any other way. It's just that these guys were not native born. They came in from different parts of the world. So the entire Bahmani court was generally very, very cosmopolitan, and probably you could probably find every kind of person sitting there. So the revolt itself, I think, was, yes, to some extent was because of the discrimination, but once they came into power, they pretty much continued the same policy. And this There was a reason why this was done. One, because a lot of these people who used to come in were highly trained soldiers, either soldiers or even administrators. So the kings felt that these people would add great to their kingdom. So that was one of the major reasons why they kept on doing it. And some of them went on to serve great powers. Like, for example, the most successful Bahmani minister was Muhammad Gawan, who probably came from Persia.
Right.
And under him, Bahmani Empire reached the pinnacle of its glory. And he was not the only one. There were a lot of these people who kept on coming in, and then, in fact, a lot of those in the Shahi Sultanates, if you see a lot of the senior ministers and senior commanders and everybody, many of them were not localized. So this constant inflow of foreigners was pretty consistent. That
Right.
happened in other parts of India as well, even with the Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So, for example, we know that when Ibn Battuta comes to India, he's given very high posts, he's given a lot of money and everything, and then he's appointed to a court position and everything. So then that wasn't uncommon; it was pretty common.
Right. Right. So,
So
what is
yeah,
interesting here is the very thing that led to the foundation of Bahmani dynasty, which was like the whole Afaki and the Deccani rivalry, and the high-handedness of probably Afakis, right, over the Deccani faction, right? It led to the Bahmani dynasty. The funny thing is, like you rightly said, they continued the same. They allowed the same influx of Afakis, right, the Deccanis into their court, and the whole demise of Bahmani dynasty itself again is because of this rivalry
true.
too, right? To an extent, right? You have this
Yes,
again,
that was one of
right?
the reasons. The second
Right.
one was the way the Bahmani Empire itself was divided. So
The Sunni Shia aspect too
that
played,
as well, and then
right?
also
Yes.
the divisions, the what do you call basically the governors are known as the amirs, and then
Right.
these people pretty much over a period of time they started asserting more and more control.
Yes.
So I think if we go to a slight tangent, I think with this discussion, I would want a lot of readers. So for a lot of readers, I think what people don't realize is the governance system during this time was not how we imagine. As in, there was a reason why feudalism was the norm everywhere, because as a king, unless you had a huge bureaucracy, which was never in vogue in a large parts of the world, it made sense to just devolve authority to a local figure. So, which meant that these local figures were pretty powerful in their own regions. So, even though there was a king who's sitting at the top, you need to understand that the local figure, for a common man, as which the farmer or something, his access to the empire was through his local boss. It could be the village head, it could be the city lord, or whatever it is. And then he could not reach beyond that. That's pretty much the extent of his reach. And these power people were, depending on who the king was and everything, they wielded powers to greater or lesser extent. And some of them obviously aspire to become more and more independent. So, which is why you see a lot of this people able to exert influence, command armies of their own, and then declaring independence. And this was an occurrence that happened all over the world.
Yeah.
So, this is we need to consider whenever we are thinking about this an empire, we need to consider it from this aspect, which is
Right.
like even though we call it as an empire, the actual regions that the kings themselves ruled was pretty small.
Pretty small. Yes.
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 And then the rest of it was parceled out to various subordinates. And depending on how powerful the king was, the subordinates would either behave well or, yeah. If he wasn't very powerful, then the subordinates would decide to have their
Yes.
own
The
way.
whole Jagir system and everything, how,
Yep.
well, it was mostly right,
So, yeah.
you
So,
could
coming
see
back to
patterns
the,
of, yes.
sorry,
Yeah,
sorry. So,
please go
coming
ahead.
back to your Afaki thing, the reason why the Afakis were brought in and then installed into the system was simply because they were the other. So this is something people need to understand. What happens is, say, if you're a king, you want these people to be loyal to you. But
Right.
the problem here is if there is a local person who already has influence in his local region, his loyalty while is there towards you, but he still is able to exert significant authority on his own. He doesn't need you to help him to assert that authority.
Right.
But most of these Afakis who came in, they're foreigners. So by giving them the authority, what you're trying to do is you kind of ensure that these people were loyal to you because they themselves did not hold any kind of power in the local
Yes.
regions. They were foreigners, right? So the local people had no loyalty towards them. So you were in a way trying to exert a greater control over the region. The issue was for a lot of the times, the first generation he was a foreigner, but then a lot of the Afakis, as soon as they came in, they kind of married among themselves. They started creating their own kind of a network, and then slowly and steadily they kind of became local. So, which meant that you had to constantly bring in foreign imports to ensure that the system worked, and that is why you can
Yes.
see a very constant churn of people keep on coming into this country.
Right. You always need, one. So you need kind of a disconnected figure
That's
from the
right.
the
That's right.
local region. Yes, so
That's
that
right.
you.
Because
Right.
yes, because if uh, you need to understand most of these when we say with kings and everything, Bollywood and movies notwithstanding, these people still ruled to some extent or to a great extent through the use of force. Like it's very hard to convince people or farmers to just give up their hard-earned grains or whatever they've grown, right? So you need force, which means that their loyalty to the, as I already mentioned, is to much of these farmers held loyalty to their village lords. And then if you allow somebody to remain in the same region over generations, then automatically for the lot of farmers and a lot of people of that region, these people are the representative of authority. So which means that your authority is probably not something they would recognize because they would never deal with you in a day-to-day of life. In fact, for most of the regular common farmers or common citizens of the country, they would have never seen the king. Like the chances, the
Right.
bigger in power, the lesser chances of people actually seeing the king. So, which means that you are this distant figure, you are there, but then for their day-to-day life, you really did not matter, and your existence or non-existence really didn't matter to them. So, which was why you needed this non-native people holding power, at least in an intermediate level, so that their loyalty was always assured towards you because they did not have any kind of local authority to back on. And this is something we see in a lot of kingdoms. You see that happening across the world and in across kingdoms, wherein people bring in foreign influence in because they wanted something, they wanted the other because to control the local people.
Yeah, and also it's a kind of a good check, right? Kind of
Yes.
a counterbalance on the the local warlord or the local Nayaka, or it might be Amir.
Yeah.
Um, right, because this way, not only that this influence less viceroy who's been Afaki, who's been sent, right? He's anytime disposable.
That's right.
And also they probably after a point they also used to Tughlaqs, I think, also made sure they were rotating these viceroys so that they don't embed themselves too deep into the region where they are, and they're developing the comfort to,
That's right.
or they're getting all of these ideas where they can now think that they're powerful, they have enough hooks in the local region that they can overthrow the yoke of Delhi Sultan, right?
That's right.
You would see this because I think we also see this effectively done by Krishna Deva Raya on the, with his own Nayakas too later, but we can come to that later. But yes,
Yeah,
please go
that's
ahead.
that's
Yeah.
that's something we can come to later.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's right. So Tughlaqs did start out with an intention of occupying the entire region, and Muhammad bin Tughlaq did move his capital, which led to an influx of people coming into the Devagiri, and from there the Bahmani Sultanate comes in, and even in the deep south in Madurai, the Madurai Sultanate comes in,
Yes.
and just to show how difficult it was to control such a large empire, you can see that both Bahmani and Madurai revolted within a few
Mm.
decades.
Right.
Uh, and the reason was simply because they were pretty confident that the rulers sitting all the way in North India, Delhi, couldn't reach them. And even if he did reach them, whatever army he could send, these guys could use, this could handle it. So that is pretty much what happens in the sense like at the fag end of the Tughlaq dynasty, despite Muhammad bin Tughlaq being a very effective ruler, at least despite his cruelty and his some strange ideas on how to rule,
Right.
he was a pretty effective ruler.
From a military standpoint, yes, he
That's
was.
right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, but then he did sow a lot of issues which his successor couldn't handle.
Yes.
That's right. So, as from a military standpoint, he managed to control his vast empire.
Right.
And then once he died, and then his successors took in, slowly and
Yeah.
steadily, the empire started disintegrating.
Yes.
So, yeah, and coming back to South India, so this was the time of the initial Muhammad bin Tughlaq's invasion of Kampili, which is he appoints a person called Bahul Khan, who's the governor of the close to Devagiri, I think. And then Bahul Khan revolts. He goes to Kampili and he takes refuge with Kampili Raya. There is a series of wars that has
Yes.
fought in Kampili, and then the Kampili kingdom is wiped out.
Yes.
And then Kampili kingdom ensures that Bahul Khan flees to Hoysala territory, but Vidyaranya hands him over back to Muhammad bin Tughlaq because he simply feels that fighting for this person, risking his entire kingdom for a person whom he barely knows or barely cares
Yes.
about, is not worth
Right.
it. So that is what happens, and then once the weakening happens, the Madurai Sultanate assert their power. So, and I think we did discuss a little bit about Veeraballala and his story in this period, which is
Yes. Yes.
Veeraballala fights off against the Madurai Sultanate, and then he's in one of the Battle of Kannur. He's captured and
Yes.
he's flayed alive. After apparently after the Sultan takes whatever treasure he can, he has the king flayed alive, and then the Hoysalas kind of fade into obscurity and replaced by, well, they fade out actually. They don't even
Right.
fade into obscurity. They
Uh,
just fade from history,
yes.
and then Vijayanagara takes over.
Right. Battle of Kannur happens in 1342, and as per the most narratives out there, Vijayanagara is founded in 1336. Right.
That's right.
That's what we're discussing, right? There is a lot. So how is it that Ballala is alive and Vijayanagara? I think that's the point where we kind of sort of left after scratching the surface.
That's
So
right.
I think this is where, at least in my knowledge, is that the real foundation, I think, of Vijayanagara, we can definitively say happened would be only after 13 kind of 42, is because Veera Ballala as such was asserting control over Hampi, Vijayanagara, right? Like we discussed, Vijayanagara was actually what was its name, and it was named after his son. And we spoke about the forward outpost at Anagundi, which was also invested by, or I should say, Veera Ballala put in his time and energy and resources into silently building it up without raising any flags on the Tughlaq end, right? So he was kind of buying his time, laying low, and that's why you see he does not. I think he lays low for almost 8 years, and he sees a change of guard in the Madurai Sultanate, who he thinks the change of guard happens with a person who replaces the earlier effective ruler. He ends up being somebody who does not have real great knowledge about the southern geography and this, the whole dynamics of South. And I think that's, if you see, when I've tried to answer why did he choose this point, is that's the only reason. Where Ballala, okay, now is my time. Where there's also a risk that I could get sandwich between the Madurai Sultanate in the south and from up north Tughlaq, because if they both link up on the idea of fighting against kafirs and infidels, in the name of Islam, then Barlala would have been toast immediately. I think that's why he takes the gamble. I would say gamble because he would have really had a sure shot victory, if not for the bad luck. So that's when he kind of goes against Madurai Sultanate, and but the tables turn in the end of Battle of Kannur, and like you said, the Hoysala ruler is completely wiped out. Is kind of flayed alive, and it is kind of after that the Sultanate goes on for some time. I think it is in 1371 is when really the Madurai Sultanate completely falls.
That's it.
If I'm not wrong, is it 1371 or even was it earlier?
I'm not sure about the dates. It's just in the late 14th century for sure.
Yes,
exactly
yes.
when is
Right.
yeah.
I'm not 100% sure about the date, but then the Madurai Sultanate as such, I think they ruled for almost 58 years. I think they have it's a very short rule, but yeah, I think they ruled for 58 years, and it's after Ballala's death that the real Harihara and Bukka actually start asserting their influence, and they start kind of shoring up their own authority. But what is interesting is even if you see in the initial proclamations, or in the regional names that they take and all, they actually never take a really a bombastic regional name. They in fact they take up the names which are more like Mahamandaleshwaras, or somebody who is upholder of the Hoysala and things like that. It was mostly from, I think, Bukkaraya that they actually started using those proper regional names when the Vijayanagara, the Sangamas had completely established their authority on the south. But
Yes.
I would say yes. But I think it was very seriously, if it was done only after completely the Madurai Sultanate was stamped out. So here I would like to actually throw the ball at you. So in the normal narratives, we hear only Harihara and Bukka, right? But my understanding is that there are 5 brothers. So any idea why it's only always on Harihara and Bukka, and why do most, even academic narratives, they don't mention about the 5 brothers?
I'll try to answer this. I'll just want to start with a disclaimer that this is just my opinion. So
Right.
it's quite possible that it might not be 100% accurate. So we need to understand what happened after Bukka to kind of get an idea what was happening. So, as we know, there were 5 brothers. Basically, it was Harihara, Bukka, Kampanna, Muddappa, and Marappa. So, yeah. And each of these brothers ruled over one portion of the empire, right? Now, after Harihara comes Bukka. After Bukka comes his son, Harihara II. Because his eldest son, Kampanna, is dead. And when Harihara comes to power, the first thing he does is, well, not the first thing, but at least the thing he does initially is he replaces all of his cousins who are ruling over those regions with his own sons. Now, this was his attempt at centralization. And I suspect when he did that, he also made sure that a lot of records which mentioned these people ruling or something were removed, just to kind of give an indication that the empire was always been a centralized authority and not a confederation of 5 ruled by 5 different brothers, each having their power centers. So, and probably these things happened pretty willingly because we don't hear about a lot of battles or wars that happened between the cousins or something. So he probably disenfranchised all his cousins, brought in his own sons to rule over these regions, and then he also made sure that the records don't really mention it deeply. That seems to be what I think happened, because that explains why all of a sudden you don't hear these people's and their extended family in the empire too much. Um, Other than that, because Kubuka comes to power, he probably effectively sidelined the rest of the brothers and their family from the power, because Bukka was the one who was very close to Haryana. Well, not in the sense, like they were not very close in the sense they were not really. He was not the closest brother. So he was just in power at probably at Vijayanagara, and he was the one who kind of came into power. Because from what we understand is all of his brothers predeceased him. So he basically had younger nephews who were ruling over this region, and Bukka becomes the king, and effectively his family becomes the royal family of Vijayanagara.
Understood. Okay.
So, and when Haryana the second comes to power, he effectively sidelines his cousins, brings his own sons into the regions that they ruled, kind of centralizes the power, and probably in that attempt, he also made sure that these names of all his brothers were no, I mean, if not lost, because it's not lost because we do know about them. So there are records that still mentions that, but it's just that it's not very extensive because they felt that it is something not really beneficial to the longevity or the future of the empire. So that seems to be the reason. That's what I think is probably what happened.
Understood. Understood. Okay. That's yeah, that seems like a kind of a very plausible, highly probable what would have happened. It
Yeah,
makes a total
and it's not unique. You would see this happening with a lot of kings when they come to power, especially if they're coming to power in a way that is not really peaceful or something. So what they try to do is they kind of try to remove the any kind of evidences of their ascent into the
Mm,
throne, and also make sure that any kind of opposition is slowly removed out of the picture. So this pretty much is common. Even in Romans, they had something called as memoria damnato, which is basically means damned for memory, which was done for a lot of rulers who were.
right.
I mean, we know that Constantine did it for Maxentius when they fought when Maxentius lost.
Right.
Maxentius was done damned memorial. So his memory was removed for damned for everything. So all his statues were destroyed. Any records about his reign was destroyed. So it was done pretty common in all over the world. So something like that. It might, if not to such a violent extent, but it was still something they thought made sense. So they kind of removed any kind of references to their existence.
Right. Right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It totally kind of makes sense. And then I think Kampana, right? Now let's go into the conquest of Madurai Sultanate.
Yep.
The total collapse of Madurai Sultanate, the entire social situation during the reign of Madurai Sultanate or the Madurai Sultans is very well documented even in Madura Vijayam.
Yeah, even Ibn Battuta in his
Even Batuta, yes, yes, yeah, in his own chronicles, absolutely, is very the sorry state of affairs is very well documented by Ibn Battuta and Ibn Ganga Devi. So the situation was that the Hindu population there was absolutely oppressed. I think that is I'm still being very charitable when I say that. To keep the show family friendly, but the situation was very tragic out there. The entire villages and towns were wiped out systematically, and there's systematic destruction of temples, temple towns, a lot of agraharas. Major targets of the sultans back then also were the Brahmins, because they used to manage a lot of these temple towns. They had access to knowledge, and not only that, but they were basically looked up to by the rest of the population to and so there was this kind of a situation where the most of the south was really aching for some sort of Hindu power to rise and take on the Madurai Sultanate head on, right? So I think that is where the Sangamas come. So would you like to kind of talk about it?
Yeah. So Madurai Sultanate, if you see, right, over its period, it over that short period, it had quite a lot of sultans. The sultan that we were discussing, the one who was responsible for killing Veerabaldana, Ghiasuddin Damghani, as he was the king,
Yes.
was the sultan. He came to power after killing his father-in-law. So, and then he dies like after a few years. Another sultan comes in. He is replaced by another sultan who comes to power by killing this sultan. So it's as an kingdom, it was very very unstable. So, which meant that there were a large number of power centers, and these nobles and people were trying to assert their dominance, which meant that it was pretty much a Game of Thrones that was going on for a small region. So Vijayanagara, as soon as Sangamas came into power, Vijayanagara did try to attack uh, Madurai Sultanate quite a few times, but they weren't successful initially. One of the major reasons for the failure was because they hadn't really secured the the region properly, as in they hadn't isolated the Madurai Sultanate. So one of the kingdoms, which was called as the Shamburaya kingdom, which is I think Arcot. I'm not sure. I think it was in that region.
Oh, yeah.
So that was allied to the Madurai Sultanate, and so Vijayanagara Empire's invasions always faced difficulty in the sense like the Sultanate wasn't isolated, so they were able to, uh, I mean, able to defeat the armies of Vijayanagara at least initially. So when we talk about Kampana, so Kampana's campaign wasn't really a year or 2 years campaign. It was a much longer period in the sense like his first, even in Ganga Devi's Madhura Vijaya, she mentions his first invasion is to the kingdom of Shamburaya. So he first conquers the Shamburaya kingdom. Then once that is done, he turns his attention towards the Madurai Sultanate. Uh, so the war between the Madurai Sultanate and Kampanna is described in Madhura Vijaya, but the thing is, we don't have the complete work of Madhura Vijaya. We have lost the last few chapters, which means that we don't really have an exact information as to what happened. But we do know that Kumara Kampanna
Kampana.
leads this diverse army, and then he manages to defeat the Sultan in a single combat. I mean, according to Madhura Vijay. Now, it's a poetic license, so which means that it might or might not have happened, but uh, so Kampana defeats the king. He conquers this entire region, uh, and one of the people, interestingly, who accompanies Kampana is Saluva Mangarasa or Saluva Mangu, as he's called as, who happens to be the ancestor of Saluva Narasimha.
Wow.
So,
Okay. Interesting.
so that was where this Saluvas hold on the region of Chandragiri
Right.
starts, because when Kampana takes over, he's appointed as the governor of this new region, and he appoints his own close friends to that region, and Mangarasa occupies one of these regions, and that's from where the Saluvas of Vijayanagara come, because there is another Saluva family from Hadavalli, which is Uttar Karnataka, Uttar Kannada region. So the Saluvas, according to Suryanath Kamath at least, the Saluvas of Vijayanagara were kind of distant cousins of the Saluvas of Hadavalli. So these Saluvas were transported by Vijayanagara from their Uttara Kannada region to all the way down
Wow.
towards Chandragiri, and which they take it as their territory.
Interesting. I didn't know this. This is fascinating. So they were actually kind of relocated. That there is this family
So
in the
one of
upper
the
Karnataka.
families, Yes, so one
Got
of
it.
the families that relocated to that region. So which is what happens. You see this dynamic movement of a lot of noble families in Vijayanagara. So what happens is for you to figure out who is becomes extremely difficult because this movement of elite mobility, as it's called, so which we were discussing about the entire Afaki, it wasn't to the same extent, but exactly the same thing was happening even in Vijayanagara, wherein Vijayanagara kings were moving in nobles from a different region and then he is transplanting them in a different region to ensure that they had better control of these regions. So this is a theme that gets repeated even in Vijayanagara. Of course,
Amazing.
Vijayanagara did not really get people from far away. They just simply moved the people from one region to the other region. So back to the discussion. So Kambarya defeats the Madurai Sultanate. And then once that is done, he is established as a governor, but he is actually the crown prince when this is happening. Tragically, Kamparna dies. He dies before Pukka. So, which means that instead of Kamparna, his younger brother Harihara II comes to power, and then Harihara, once he comes to power, he ensures that all his cousins, which includes even Kamparna's son, is replaced by his own sons. So power
Hmm.
goes back to the Harihara's family. So his sons Devaraya, the first Devaraya the first becomes the king. He's followed by a couple of other rulers, and then yeah. So that's the story. Yeah.
Right, right. Yes. So yeah, I think it is only after the fall of Madurai Sultanate that the Sangamas have really, taken over the entire of South.
That's
Is
right.
that would that be an accurate statement to say in your
Mm,
um,
so they did okay. So the Sangamas take over most of the Hoysala territory, which
yes,
includes the Karnataka region, portions of Andhra Pradesh, United Andhra Pradesh. I'll not
yes,
even go to the geography to the other side. So the united portion of Andhra Pradesh, portions of it, especially the western portions of some western portions of it. And then with this interior Madurai Sultanate, they expand all the way towards south, occupying most of Tamil Nadu and everything. So the remaining portions of Andhra Pradesh, especially, is not yet in power. Vijayanagara doesn't control it yet. So
right,
that is something that happens over the generations. So you have
yes,
Devaraya the first, Devaraya the second, expanding. Especially Devaraya the second is the one who is under whom the most of the expansion happens towards the Andhra regions, wherein he
Andhra region.
occupies.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, he occupies most of these territories,
yes,
and then
yes,
he kind of reaches all the way up in Orissa. I mean, not
yes.
per se. So
Then
his
they
his
lose. Then Vijayanagara loses it. Then Saluva tries to regain it, and then you
that's
have
right. That's right.
right,
That's right.
which is again what Krishna Devaraya again goes after. Right,
That's right.
right. Okay, so that was the whole thing about Madurai kind of Sultanate. So um, what in fall of Sangamas, right? What, in your opinion, really led to the Sangamas taken over by Saluvas?
Okay, so we are actually jumping almost for the listeners. We are
Yes,
jumping
yes,
almost 100 years now.
yes,
Almost, not exactly. I
yes.
think yes,
That's
we
right.
are actually
Yes,
jumping 100 years.
yes.
So the reason what happens is if you see out of the Pancha Sangamas as they are known as the first five Sangamas kings, which is Harihara the second, Devaraya the first, and Devaraya the second. Well, probably the greatest of like all in five of them gave pretty stable rule. With Devaraya the second, called Pratapa Devaraya,
Right.
was considered to be the greatest of the Sangama rulers. In fact, I would say he was probably as successful a ruler as Krishna Devaraya because during his rule, he had to face a united Bahmani empire,
Right.
while Krishna Devaraya still had to face a divided and disintegrating Bahmani empire. So, Devaraya's success, if you want to call it, was probably to the same level as Krishna Devaraya because he did expand the empire pretty far. And then we know that one of his generals, called as Lankanda Dandesha, Dandesha just means general. So Lakarna, he invades Sri Lanka, and then he has it is the kingdom of Kandy pays tribute to Vijayanagara. So Devaraya is considered to be the greatest of the Sangama kings.
Exactly.
After the death of Devaraya, the Sangamas start producing really bad kings. So the empire is at its peak at this time, and then uh, the next succeeding kings like Chandragiri and all the other kings, they are pretty much, well, not really good in the sense that they are not that interested in ruling. And then um, Vijayanagara as an empire, right, was starting to show signs of the problems that would start to plague it in the future. So what I
Right.
mean by that is, uh, Harihara the second, when he does the centralization, right, that what he did was pretty far thinking, because he realized that if he allowed his cousins to rule independently or even as subordinates for a longer period, they would be able to create a powerful local dynasties, and these dynasties would someday in the future rebel against him and against his sons or his grandson or something, and cause the division of the empire. So his decision to dispose them and then appoint his sons brought the power back into the family. Now, this while this is happening, I think even Deva the first did the same thing. He again does one more round of this, wherein he removes his cousins and then appoints his own sons to the power. And but Devaraya the second does something a little bit different. So even during this time, what used to happen is Vijayanagara already had started adopting some of the practices of its preceding dynasties, especially like the Kakatiya Nayaka system, which is the Nayamkara system,
Nayamkara system, yes.
which is while it was a mix of the Kakatiya system and how the entire Tughlaq or the Khilji dynasty and everything was already created. In the sense, like there were all these Nayakas or governors over a specific region, and this Nayaka was supposed to act as a military governor and a civilian administration. It was his job to ensure that there was this force all maintained at his expense, which could march to the aid of the king. Now, the moment we say this, right, we can immediately see what becomes apparent the problem with the system, which is you are pretty much empowering a smaller king with an army and resources to pretty much declare his independence if he feels that you are not powerful enough. You're pretty much creating
Yes.
smaller sections, centers of power.
Yes.
So you will be a rule, and you require a pretty strong king to
Yes.
rule over this region. So even Vijayanagara, if you see, at least Burdett style mentions that the region that Vijayanagara itself ruled was the surrounding areas of Vijayanagara,
Yes.
some portions of Rayalaseema, which was what considered to be the crown lands.
Right.
And these were the lands in which Vijayanagara was getting direct income. Everything else was parceled out
Yes.
to initially to the divisions of whoever they were, and then to the Nayakas. So what happens is, because this kind of system requires a strong king to assert his dominance over all the Nayakas, and that is when Sangamas ran out of ability to keep producing strong rulers.
Right.
So after Devaraya, all the rulers were pretty useless. So and
Yeah, I
then
think last of the Sangamas, they were all engaging in sensual pleasures, debauchery, and not only they were incapable too, mostly, right?
true,
And
true. As I think the sensual part probably is propaganda. I mean, it doesn't matter. Like all kings
right.
did ensure in all
Yes,
of
yeah.
that. After all, they were supposed to have a harem of 20,000 people. Like
Right.
that's an exaggeration, but I'm
That's
just
exactly. Yes,
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 I'm
yeah.
just saying that all kings did
Right.
that.
Yeah.
It's just like along with that, they were most of them were pretty competent with regarding maintaining the
Yes.
power, which these guys failed.
They were incompetent. Yes.
Yes, so
Yes.
it was during this time that Vijayanagara started facing serious problems.
Territorial
Yes.
reductions.
So,
Yes.
like by this time, Bahmani's kingdom was already established quite a long time back. It was established all the way during the time of the end of Harihara's rule, and then Vijayanagara and Bahmanis were fighting a series of battles. And despite what we get that information from Ferista regarding how these battles unfolded, it doesn't seem like there was a lot of territory that was getting exchanged between the kings. So the battles seem to be some kind of stalemate. I mean,
Stalemates. Yes.
Forrester keeps on describing about some glorious victories, but then
Yes.
issue here is we don't see any territory being exchanged. So
Right.
most of the territory remains static. So whatever territory Vijayanagara occupies, except for a few small forts, which are along the border, that keeps changing hands. So from what we understand is both Bahamani and Vijayanagara were pretty well matched. Probably Brahmani had a military upper hand, if you want to give Barrister the benefit of doubt, and then they were still winning, but these victories were probably nothing except for some kind of validation victories, in the sense like they could just prove that we defeated these guys,
Yeah.
but it did not translate to any concrete things on the ground. Now, during the last stages of Sangama rule, we see this situation changing. Now we do see concrete changes. So, for example, this was during the time of Muhammad Gawan, who is considered to be the best, the greatest of
Administrators.
of Harmony Empire.
Bahmanis. Yes.
So, during the time of Muhammad Gawan, we see for the first time actual territory, massive territorial changes happening. So, it was under him that Goa was captured. And this was a big thing because even after winning so many supposed victories, according to Ferrista, Goa, which was very close to the Bahmani Empire, was never taken away from Vijayanagara. Vijayanagara always maintained a control of Goa.
Right.
And now, under Muhammad Gawan, Goa is captured. There is an invasion of South, which was a raiding mission, actually, even though it's called as an invasion. It was probably a huge raid. And then he also captures regions, the northern portions of Andhra Pradesh.
Right.
Now, to make matters worse for Vijayanagara, this is exactly the time when the Gajapatis invade Vijayanagara. So they occupy a lot of portions of Andhra Pradesh, which these were actually probably not recent, but still fairly new areas for Vijayanagara, which meant that the local chiefs hadn't really adopted to Vijayanagara rule. So when the Gajapatis invasion happens, the defense was pretty half-hearted.
Yeah.
So they just switched sides.
Yes.
So that's in what happened. Now, while all this was happening, Sarva Narasimha, who was the governor of Chandragiri, he's called as the Mahamandaleshwar of Chandragiri.
Yes.
Which is kind of, I think, the border of Tamil Nadu, and it's close to still Tamil Nadu, but I think it's very close to the border of Andhra Pradesh.
Yes. With Tirupati that's where it is, like on the border.
So it's in Andhra Pradesh then.
Yes.
Chandragiri.
Yes, it's Andhra Pradesh. Yes.
Okay. So he's the Maman. His seat of power was in Chandragiri, and he by this time was very well established. He was a famous general who had fought during I think his father had fought during the rule of Devaraya, and then he was a very celebrated general, and he also had a lot of subordinates, very capable subordinates who themselves were successful generals. Now he watches the empire struggling, and then he realizes that he had to do something if the empire had to survive. And this is where the famous overthrow of power happens with respect to Saluvas. Saluvas Narasimha sends his general Tuluva Narasimha, who, we call him Tuluva Narasimha, but his name was probably also Narasimha. So just to make it, I think the readers, to make it easier for a lot of audience, people just call him Narasimha, but probably his name was Narasimha. It seems like they had a lot of Narasimhas, so which made it very difficult to figure out who's who. So Tuluva Narasimha, he goes to Vijayanagara, and he finds that the king has just fled. He occupies the capital, and then Saluva Narasimha comes, and then he's crowned as the king.
Yes.
And the transfer of power is pretty bloodless. Most of the Nayakas simply switch sides.
Yes. Because they had already lost the confidence in the last of the Sangama rulers.
That's right.
They were incompetent. Yeah.
That's right. So although that was pretty, bloodless, it's funny that one of the few people who did revolt were the Saluvas of Hadavalli, who were actually the cousins of the Saluvas of Vijayanagara. So they were the only people who kind of refused to accept their cousins as the kings of Vijayanagara. But all said and done, none of the major vassals revolt.
Right.
And Salva Narasimha comes to power in 1485. He establishes his rule, and then he manages to slowly and steadily roll back this invasion of
Right.
Gajapati Empire.
So one thing you had mentioned in between, rightly mentioned, is, in reality, the emperors or the kings, they controlled a small portion of territory, themselves and their own crown lands, whatever it might be. Right. So in the sense of Vijayanagara, uh, especially the city of Vijayanagara, what we now call as Hampi and Nalgundi, right, or Nagalapuram and all of that area. Hampi especially was considered a very sacred place, and the Vijayanagara emperors themselves, they derived their own strength and influence, or the divine status of themselves as kings, right, was in itself reinforced by the fact that they were keeping the the sacred city of Hampi and Vijayanagara secure. And I think this also again goes back into, I know we went from Madurai Sultanate, jumped, the start of Sangamas and the fall of Sangamas. Now I think one of the points that you touched, I just wanted to kind of illustrate the importance of the city of Vijayanagara or Hampi. This kind of ties into the entire legends and lores around foundation of Vijayanagara. Right. I know we haven't touched on the most, important figure of Vidyaranya. Right now,
Yep.
whether most of his, there is kind of a legend of how he comes to Hampi and he brings Harihara and Bukka and kind of consecrates the stone, in the foundation stone in middle of Hampi, and kind of semi coronates them, right. There is a lore, and then one of Vidyaranya's disciples, he rings the ganta during the whole ritual at a wrong moment, which turns out to be an inauspicious moment, and where the legend says that Vidyaranya is kind of saddened and devastated because of that inauspicious moment, the bell ringing, where he says, okay, now, he says, as in, the Devi comes in and tells him that, okay, Vijayanagara is going to last only 300 years instead of 3,000 years. That's the
And
legend around it. Now,
yep.
there is a similar legend for even Vijaypura or Bijapur. But it's very interesting that that there are these fascinating legends around foundation of some of these important cities. I talk about this in the foundation series episode of the foundation of Vijayanagara, where I talk about the various legends that were floating in that region at that time for even some of the Bahmani cities, and there is one such for even Hyderabad too. So I mean, how seriously we can take, I mean, these are just, I think, are legends, but the fact remains that Hampi, and even I think the Matunga Hills, I think, was, it's very sacred for, I think, a lot of reverence towards Hanuman, I guess, right? Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
So, similarly, right, I think even in Ramayana, it is mentioned how there is
So
this place.
the Kishkinda is
Kishkinda, and yes, the whole
considered
thing,
to be,
right?
yeah.
So there's a lot of religious significance and spiritual significance to the region near what we call modern day Hampi, where um, wherein the rulers who are holding it, it's kind of their dharma to protect that sacred space. Um, and if at any point you kind of lose it, you lose your what we would regional shine, which is what I think. Then it now this point takes us to the sack of Hampi after Battle of Talikota, where you would see uh, the Hampi being desecrated. Even though Vijayanagara hasn't actually lost the city of Hampi, because the the Deccan, this Sultanate alliance, they all like vacate it and go back to their own borders because they're untenable to hold uh, Vijayanagara city as such for such a long time, because Vijayanagara army, even after Talikota, was intact to a larger extent, even though they suffered a severe setback on the field. But you will see that once the Hampi is desecrated, there are all sorts of challenges that rise for the original Vijayanagara rulers. Right after Alia dies, Tirumala too, he gets a lot of rebellions keeps sprouting up across the south and all, where it is said that most of it was mainly because of Aravidu's ending up losing Hampi or allowing it to be desecrated, which was the main duty of the Vijayanagara emperors to hold. So that again, I just wanted to kind of talk about this aspect of foundation too,
Yes,
as to why Vijayanagara is so important as a city too.
that's to the empire. Yes. Well, I think whatever you said about the religious aspect is something probably your take is pretty accurate. But and while I wouldn't really argue on that, but yes, I mean there are evidences of that, right? Like Vijayanagara, if you see as a city, in the Vijayanagara Empire's case, it is pretty vulnerable. It's way at the top of the empire, so
Yes.
it did not make any sense for them to hold on to that as their capital.
Yes.
Instead, they could have just simply shifted the capital to a region which is much more better defended, like what they did with Penukonda.
Yes.
When they shifted to Penukonda, the reason why they shifted to Penukonda was, yes, one was that it was the stronghold of the
Yeah.
Aravidu family, but at the same time it was much better defended because it lay in the center of the empire rather than
Yes.
exposed to the north. So
Right.
your take could be true because any kingdom or any empire, the way they ruled was through this sense of myth building. Ruling
Yes.
a kingdom or an empire was not just through force;
Yes.
it also needed a kind of a myth, an aura of sacredness or untouchability or something. Is something that all kingdoms try to build. This was to ensure, as we already discussed, because many of these kings were pretty much using the force to control the power, right? So, which means that how to dissuade people from deciding that, let me try to become the next king.
Right.
So,
Right.
one of the
Yes.
ways to do that is to build a lot of myth. So, you create this aura around you. And religion was something that was used by many of these kings. So, with respect to Vidyaranya, I feel that he was probably involved, but over a period of centuries, his role kept on getting increased to such an extent that it was almost because uh, the reason why you say that is because one of the founding myths says that the kings converted to Islam and then they came back. So in that myth, Vidyaranya needs to be such an all-embarrassing, all-powerful figure who
Yes.
converted these two people, brought them to Hampi, made them kings, and it was on his authority that they became kings, right? But if you see the actual history, that probably wasn't accurate because
Right.
like even if Vidyaranya was an extremely powerful religious figure, he couldn't control the secular kings. As in, it would be very hard. I mean, again, as this is the same thing we discussed in the last episode, which is like uh, whether we like it or not. Most people who ruled over a region for a very long time felt that it was their region. They really did not want to be ruled by someone else. So to have some random people just being treated as their overlords, people wouldn't take it lying down. And
Yeah,
most of the
especially
times,
also, right. Also, especially also when you have like Sringeri Pita there, right, which was actually held probably more influence too. And I think even Vidyaranya, I think, so I think he's just, I would say as some sort of anthropomorphic, you know, this figure to represent the Pita is what I think. Right, the entire institute, because like you said, giving this such a fascinating, building a fascinating story and this figure around the foundation will give it a lot of gravitas.
true.
You know,
But you need to understand most of this came later. A
right,
lot of this information, a lot of these records, and a lot of these descriptions, everything comes
right,
much later. So, which means that it would be akin to somebody in modern times writing a history about 1857, the revolt, the first
right,
war of independence. However accurate would he or she would like to be, it still would mean that his information would be not completely accurate. So, and that is when somebody takes that as truth, like 500 years later, it is already colored by whatever biases that person's suffered, because he was far away from the history, right? Is the thing.
right,
The first war of Indian independence happened in 1857. So that from there to now, it's almost more than 100 or 150 years. So if we are writing the history of your independence and then we write whatever we think is correct, and then we try to increase the role of somebody whom we liked.
right.
And 400 years later, somebody picks it up and then says that, oh, this is what it is. You realize that it is a picture, but it's not really the most accurate picture, which is what I
Yes,
think happened with respect to this entire
Vidyaranya,
story
yes,
and you Vidyaranya, which is Vidyaranya
yes,
was probably involved. Again, I
yes,
don't know. He might or might not have been involved, but the way he's presented as a single most important person wasn't
right,
accurate. And because as a secular kings, it would be very difficult for the Vijayanagara to wield any kind of authority, because you need to understand, right? Once you their authority was not just based on religious; it was also secular authority, in the sense like
right.
you had all the other subordinate kings, well, basically warlords. So you had to have like actual physical temporal authority. Just the religious authority wasn't sufficient. So it had to go hand in hand. So this entire story, as you mentioned about Vidyaranya, is something that probably over a period of time it kind
So
of got
legend has been
coalesced,
built around it.
built
Yes,
over it.
yes,
Yes.
yeah. I think the successive rulers built it, but yes, Vidyaranya, and after him, lot of royal preceptors. So I think they were like like you said, they were royal precept. They were probably had influence only in the spiritual matters where they could advise the king on what their probably Raja Dharma was in that sense, right? But yes, I think these figures became so important probably to the kings themselves, the first initial Sangama rulers and later, that they were elevated to the position, after the fact too, in the records or in their inscriptions, where you're constantly taking the name of your royal preceptor or your royal guru, to before you do anything or you consult with them and things like that. I think that's what was. But the another interesting thing is, yes, I mean, if you look at Hampi as such, neither it was a fortress, natural fortress, right? They had to build like 7 concentric circles around it, fortifications gradually to fortify the city. It was, but it wasn't a fortress as such. You had the Tungabhadra, and then beyond it, this side of you have Anagundi, and there you have the Hampi, right? It is, Hampi as such, when initially the city was being built up with the Sangamas themselves, they had, it is, the records say that they had a lot of difficulty because it was mostly a barren land. It was very hilly, mountainous. Right now, you have to build a whole city and settle population there. the problem of irrigation, water. How are you going to bring in water into the city? So yes, I mean, if you think about it, it's very interesting how that city actually became the city, how the place became the kind of capital of Vijayanagara, right?
Yeah.
It beats that logic, but the only explanation was that there was some already spiritual and religious importance to the place, due to either Ramayana or whatever there was in that place, which basically was effectively channeled, uh, as a built as a sacred city, and where these successive rulers, they started channeling that through their kingship. Right now you have, it's just like how the Vatican was at the time, right? How important it was, like whoever used to hold the main, the Rome in the, probably in the medieval or the post medieval too, right? Or even during the Crusades too, the one who really held power around Rome, they could call the shots, with the Pope, right? So I think it was mostly that sort of a thing with even Vijayanagara is what the city as such, from a foundation perspective.
That is right.
Yeah. Cool. I think we have delved quite enough into the foundation aspect, and also we have touched on Sangamas. I think the next episode we will have to go deeper. Probably, I would really love to hear more about the. I think talk more about the unique spin which Vijayanagara gave on the whole Nankara system that was imported, kind of inspired by probably Kakatiyas, because there was some different unique aspects with the way Vijayanagara, implemented that whole system. I think the next episode we should really touch on that.
I personally, I feel that it was a little bit more of influenced by the Islamic system rather than
Right.
the Kakataya system. You see a lot of similarities with their the Islamic systems like that, which is the Iqta system, as it was called as.
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
pretty much more similar to that. So yes,
But
we
yeah,
can
we
discuss.
should go, because even the Ikta system, it had, it went through an evolution of its own.
That's right.
Right, because initially, there were all these jagirdars and all. They went through. There were some problems which were created because of that. I think we should discuss that in the next episode, and how that led to the rise of all these Nayaka powers later on, who ended up creating all sorts of headaches
That's right.
to.
So I think we can
Right.
transition from that to the rule of Saluvas, and then
Yes.
to the rule of, well, the start of rule of Tudwas, and
Yes.
then
Yes.
we can slowly build
Absolutely, we
towards
should.
Krishna Devaraya.
Right. I would love to hear more about it. And at some point in one our other episode, we should touch on the social life of Vijayanagara too. I think our listeners would really love to hear what these people used to wear, how were the hospitals then, what were the kind of medicines, what they used to eat, what the commerce looked like. I think it would be really interesting
That would be
that
great.
we delve into it. Cool. Thank you, Abhijit, for taking time again.
It's been a pleasure as always.
Thank you.